Hey everyone, welcome to Photomotion Horizon, our most advanced projection. But don't worry, you found a perfect place because this video is all about your very first animation in Photomotion Horizon. I'm so excited to see you here, and although Photomotion does require a little bit of learning at the beginning, I'm pretty sure you will absolutely love the journey. I'll leave you with Jack and David, who will be your teachers. The best way is to follow along, so feel free to pause the video at any point or rewind back if you missed something. That's all from me for now. Take it away, Jack.
Hey, what's going on there, guys? Jack here. Let's start off by double-clicking on this Photomotion X folder, what we freshly extracted from this zip file. We have a few folders here, and what we want to do is access this projections one in order to see all of the projections that are available: Parallax, Glacier, Portrait, Depth, Mirage, and finally Horizon. Obviously, we want to access this Horizon project and give After Effects a moment or two as we load all of these files into the cache. In case you're wondering, Photomotion is a purely project-based application, so no need to fiddle around with script or extensions. Just double-click on the project and you're good to go. In saying that, when we reach the opening splash screen, keep in mind that Photomotion is, of course, a viewport-based application, so most of the workflow is done through the viewport and, of course, effect controls. Back to the point of the video, just click on this Start Horizon button, which will bring us into the main dashboard. You'll notice all of these buttons are grayed out, and that's basically to stop us from accidentally shooting ourselves in the foot and help guide us into the beginning of the workflow. So nothing really we can do other than clicking on this Add Photo here and accessing this Add Photo composition. What we need to do here is essentially import our photo by going over to File, then Import, and then click File, which will bring us into this File Explorer tab. We're just going to click on the photo here and select import. Right, so now that our photo is in the projects tab, we're just going to drag and drop it into this composition here and then parent it to the parent layer whilst holding shift. We'll then scale and position the picture by the parent layer, not necessarily by the base image layer. There is a reason for this, which will make sense in a bit. Once we're happy, we'll go back to the main dashboard and we can see this 3D cage is now open to us. Before we get to the cage, we're going to be wanting to implement our first layer. Double click on this layer 3 tab and that will bring us into this window. As we're not importing any Photoshop layers, we'll be creating this mask by ourselves. So just go to this draw button over here and then double click. That will bring us into this composition over here, and then what we'll do is we'll just select the layer down here and then click the pen tool just up here. We're going to just mask out this couple here, but we're going to do this as finite as possible, taking as much time as we need. The better our mask is in Horizon, the better our animation in the end product will be. So we're going to take our time to really make sure that we get the right outline of this couple here. So once we're done, we're just going to check out our mask and see if there's anything that looks a little bit wrong, or maybe there's a couple of points that are a little bit off. So within this example, we have this gap in between the couples here, and we're going to want to remove that in order to create a more realistic animation. So we're just going to mask this area out here, again taking our time with the masking process to get the best results. We'll want something like this, but our mask hasn't removed this part of the image just yet. What we'll want to do is select this layer down here and then hit M on our keyboard to bring up these two masks. We'll then want to select the second one, mask 2, as that's the one that we've made between a couple here, and then change this add just over here to subtract, which will subtract that part of the mask from the overall mask. Cool, so once we're done and we're happy, let's swap out this pen tool for the selection tool, and the next step is just jumping back to the main dashboard. And as you can see, we have this couple that is masked now outside of our image and on top of our cage. So in saying that, let's explain what our cage is. This is a 3D representation of how our scene sits within the 3-dimensional space. This will make sense as we go along, but we have the roof here at the top, the two sides panel, and of course our floor plate at the bottom. The center, of course, is our horizon within the image. So we'll extend the horizon here and cover the horizon within the image to have it fit within the 3D scene. We'll then select this floor plate just over here and navigate over to effect controls, where we can alter the rotation. If we bring this rotation to 100, those of you with a careful eye will notice that our floor plate hasn't gone away, but it's rotated within that 3D space and now it's just too short. So let's extend it slightly and bring it across our screen. Hopefully this makes it a little bit clearer on what this 3D cage is. What we want from the floor plate now is just to have it almost touching our subject's feet here, so it locks them into that position as our animation occurs. If we don't do this correctly, we'll run into a problem where our subjects will kind of just like float off the ground, which isn't exactly what we want. We also don't want this cage intersecting with their feet either. That will also create a problem within our animation. Okay, so the next step is to extend this cage a little bit more, making sure that we have the whole image covered. Right, so with that being said, let's look at disabling our cage controller for a second so we can check out our main subjects here. We could do that by going down here to cage setup and then uncheck this show cage setup, which will then disable our cage here and show us the main subjects. We can see that it's coming along really quite nicely and we're quite happy with this section. Let's get to animating this out by going over to the animate button over here and then checking this show controls animation checkbox. What that essentially will do is swap our cage setup for our animation one. Before getting to the controller, you'll notice one thing has become immediately apparent. This image now looks substantially low quality, which is slightly strange, but there's a reason for it. Photomotion is a fairly intensive task, so what we've done is lower the preview image resolution within the project in order to help you out with speed. We call this the speed workflow and it's enabled by default. We can change this, however, by clicking on this speed button at the very top to the right and then changing this speed workflow from enabled to disabled in order to bring back the original image resolution. Much sharper, but it will come with some side effects. Right, so with that done, let's bring our playhead to the 90 frame point within our animation and then hit N on our keyboard in order to mark out. What this will do essentially is just leave us with a clear working area. The next step is just to zoom our animation by clicking on the magnify icon and then going to effect controls. Now you may notice because our speed workflow is disabled, this might take a little bit more time, as you can see by the loading bar just over here. We've cut the remainder of these within the video, but it's just a quick demonstration to say that your project will be slower as a result of unchecking that checkbox. Let's see about adding in some vertical movement too by selecting the bottom button over here and then moving this multiplier up, which will create this swooning animation, which is quite nice and dynamic. We'll also move the controller slightly just to animate the camera within the scene. Now there is an issue some of you may have picked up beforehand, and that is this duplication issue here. We need to create a clean plate here in order to fix it. If we move the controller slightly, we can clearly see this issue a lot more, including the effect that actually our cage has to the background image. Okay, so what is a clean plate? A clean plate is a representation of what we think is actually behind the layer here. Because Photomotion has no information about this, we're seeing this duplication issue occur, which we can't have within our final animation. So just double click on this clean plate button on the main dashboard here, and then we're going to navigate to draw, as we're not importing that data from, say for example, places like Photoshop. Okay, so from here what we need to do is bring our needle to the very beginning of the composition. It's pretty important that we do this first, and then what we're going to do is select this layer down here, and then the clone stamp tool just up here. We're then going to double click on the viewport, which will bring us into this view. Clone stamp is a pretty useful tool. What it does basically is it transplants areas of your image in order to remove other parts. So what we're going to do is transplant some of these clouds here, as that's what we expect to see behind our main subject's bodies, and we'll be setting our sample area by holding Alt on the keyboard and then clicking on this clouds. Now because the surrounding areas of our subjects are clouds, we're going to use a flow of about 14% just so it blends in rather quite nicely. It's just light touches here, as we want this to be as seamless as possible, so you can't actually tell it's unaltered. Once done, again, we'll swap out the clone stamp tool for the selection tool so we don't end up clone stamping our buttons, of course, and then we'll jump back to the main dashboard. Let's bring our playhead to the end, and now if we look, we can see that our animation no longer has that duplication problem. So with our main animation set up, let's look at removing this other issue just up here, which is this white edge. What this is the camera detecting the negative space beyond the background. In other words, this will appear as nothingness within our final animation, which of course is something we don't want. So not all is lost, there is a fix in Horizon for this. So if we click on this button and then go over to effect controls, we can then drag up this white edge fix, which will mirror out our background here and therefore get rid of this white edge. Clicking on add background. Okay, so with that done, let's click on settings here and then check this activate particles to enable particles within our animation. These are okay, but let's see how they look at the beginning of our animation. Now these particles exist within a 3D scene and they will move just as the camera does. Therefore we can see that in our starting position, these ones within the forefront will need to be moved as they're blocking our subjects. We can do this by just clicking on the close button over here and then altering the particle's positioning attributes, in particular the X-axis. So just shuffling shuffling along to the side just like this. If we preview this now, we can see that those particles are fully immersed within a 3D scene and blending with the overall animation rather quite nicely. So with that complete, let's look at exporting out our animation by double clicking on this export button, which will bring us into the export composition. Right, and you might be wondering what these numbers here below represent, and that is the Photomotion Perfect Cut system. What this is, in effect, is just the number of frames to achieve either no loops, 90 frames, one loop in and out, 180 frames, two loops of that in and out movement, 360 frames, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So what we want from our animation is for it to loop in and out, so the camera will go into the scene and then come back out, like a kind of boomerang effect. So for this two loops, Photomotion Perfect Cut system is telling us that we want 180 frames for us to achieve this animation. So we'll go here to frame count and then type out 180 frames, which will bring our playhead to the 180 frame point. By doing so, the Perfect Cut system will highlight green for 180, and before even thinking about rendering out, we'll really make sure to mark the end of our work path. Otherwise, After Effects will still render out the whole entire composition regardless. Okay, so with that done, let's head over to composition and select this add to render queue, which will add our composition working area to After Effects render engine just down here. We'll then click on this lossless in order to bring up this output module settings just over here, changing the format from AVI to QuickTime. AVI is just an extremely heavy codec, and there's not really any need for it in this situation. In any case, we'll hit OK and then we'll hit render just over here. However, if we want an MP4 to upload straight to social media, so for example, this can't be done within After Effects. We'll need to take this into Adobe Media Encoder, and we can do this through two methods. One of which is by clicking Add to Media Encoder Queue, which will create a copy of the project and bring that copy into Media Encoder. It's kind of frustrating though, as the project file is quite hefty and it takes up a little bit of space. The other way, the one that we're demonstrating, is just by rendering out as a .mov and then converting that render into an MP4. So we'll just make sure when in Media Encoder that our format is set to H.264 and our output is to our liking. Okay, so that's just a basic example on how Horizon works. In case you want something a little bit more advanced, we have a plethora of classes available. As usual, thanks for watching. We hope you find this video useful and of course enjoy your photo animation journey.